When she shouted, "If you can tame the fiercest bull in the region, I'll marry you." Amid the crowd's laughter, she expected to humiliate the young cowboy forever. What she didn't know was that he would take every word seriously, and that the bull was hiding a secret that would change everything. The laughter hit Jake Morrison like a slap across the face. Standing there in his best-worn jeans and freshly pressed shirt, bouquet of wildflowers trembling in his calloused hands, he watched as Catherine Hartwell threw her head back and laughed until tears streamed down her cheeks. The entire harvest festival seemed to stop. Every eye in Millbrook County was on them now. "You want to ask me out?" Catherine wiped her eyes with the back of her perfectly manicured hand. "Jake Morrison, the hired hand who mucked out my stalls last spring?" Her voice carried across the barn like a bell, clear and cutting. "Honey, you're sweet, but you're not exactly what I had in mind for a husband." The crowd around them chuckled. Jake felt his face burn red. He'd practiced this moment for weeks, saved up 3 months of wages just to buy her something nice, worked double shifts to get the evening off. Now he stood there like a fool while the richest woman in 3 counties made a joke out of his heart. "I'm serious, Catherine." His voice came out rougher than intended. "I know I'm not much to look at, but I can work. I can provide for you. I love..." "Love?" Catherine stepped closer, her green eyes sparkling with something between amusement and cruelty. "Jake, sweetheart, love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't run a 5,000-acre ranch. Love doesn't make up for the fact that you live in a trailer behind Murphy's feed store." The words stung because they were true. Jake had been working ranches since he was 14, bouncing from job to job, never quite earning enough to get ahead. But he was good with animals, better than good. He had a gift that even the old-timers respected. Horses calmed under his touch. Cattle followed his lead without question. He'd gentled animals that other men had given up on. Catherine must have seen something in his expression because her smile faltered for just a moment. Then she straightened her shoulders and looked around at the crowd. "Tell you what, Jake, I'll make you a deal." The barn went quiet except for the distant sound of fiddle music from the dance floor. "If you can do something for me, something that proves you're more than just another cowboy with big dreams and empty pockets." Catherine's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the barn. "If you can tame Thunder Ridge's Black Devil, I'll marry you." The crowd gasped. Someone dropped a beer bottle. It shattered on the concrete floor like Jake's heart was shattering in his chest. Black Devil. Everyone in 3 counties knew that bull. Marcus Colton's prize, Angus, had put 4 professional riders in the hospital over the past 2 years. The animal was massive, mean, and had never been successfully ridden or handled by anyone. Even the stock contractors who brought bulls to the rodeo circuit wouldn't touch him. "Catherine, no." The voice came from behind Jake. He turned to see old Pete Williams, the festival organizer, shaking his head. "That animal ain't right in the head. He's hurt people." Catherine's eyes never left Jake's face. "What do you say, cowboy? You want to prove you're worthy of a Hartwell? Here's your chance." Jake looked around at the faces surrounding them. Some showed pity, others curiosity. A few held the kind of cruel excitement people got when they smelled disaster coming. He should walk away. Any sensible man would turn around, get in his beat-up Ford, and drive home. Find a nice girl who worked at the diner or the hardware store, someone in his own league. But when he looked at Catherine standing there in her designer jeans and silk blouse, chin raised like she owned the world, something stubborn and desperate unfurled in his chest. "Fine." The word came out before he could stop it. "I'll do it." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others argued. Pete Williams threw his hat on the ground and cursed. But Jake only had eyes for Catherine, watching the surprise flicker across her features before she masked it with that practiced smile. "Well, well." She extended her hand like she was sealing a business deal. "You've got 6 months, Jake Morrison. 6 months to turn that devil into a lamb. If you can do it, if you can prove to everyone here that you've tamed Marcus Colton's bull, then I'll keep my word." Jake shook her hand. Her skin was soft as butter, nothing like his work-roughened palms. "And if I can't, then you leave Millbrook County for good. Find yourself another place to chase impossible dreams." The music had stopped completely. Now, the only sound was the shuffling of boots on concrete and the distant lowing of cattle in the pastures beyond. Jake nodded once, released her hand, and walked out of that barn with his head high and his heart pounding like a war drum. He didn't sleep that night, or the next. Instead, he drove out to Marcus Colton's ranch and stood at the fence line, watching Black Devil pace his pen like a caged storm. The bull was everything Jake had heard and more. Nearly 2,000 pounds of muscle and rage, with horns that could gore a man clean through, and eyes that held nothing but hatred for the human race. "You thinking about Catherine Hartwell's little challenge?" Marcus Colton appeared beside him at the fence, chewing on a piece of straw. He was a lean man in his 60s, with skin like leather and eyes that missed nothing. "Maybe." Jake kept his gaze on the bull. "What's his story?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Jake thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, the older man spit out his straw and sighed. "Found him half dead in a creek bed 3 years ago. Somebody had worked him over real good. Chains, whips, electric prods, the whole 9 yards. By the time I got him healthy again, something inside had broken. He don't trust humans. Can't say I blame him." Jake's stomach churned. Animal abuse always made him sick. "You ever try to gentle him?" "Son, I've had the best trainers in 3 states take a crack at that bull. He's put 2 men in wheelchairs and 1 in the ground. I keep him around because he's good breeding stock, but handling him?" Marcus shook his head. "That's not training. That's suicide. Catherine doesn't know about the abuse, does she?" Marcus gave him a sharp look. "You thinking of backing out? Wouldn't blame you. Hell, I'd respect you for it." Jake watched the bull charge the fence, his hooves throwing up clouds of dust. "No, I'm thinking I need help." "From who?" "You ever hear of Elena Vasquez?" Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "Old Elena? The horse whisperer up in the mountains? Son, she's been retired for 15 years. Doesn't take students anymore, especially not for something like this." "She might, if I can convince her." "And if she won't?" Jake turned away from the fence. "Then I guess I'll be leaving Millbrook County come spring." But as he drove home that night, his mind wasn't on failure. It was on Catherine's face when she'd made that challenge. For just a moment, when she'd first started laughing, he'd seen something else in her eyes. Not cruelty, fear. Like she was as trapped as he was, just in a different kind of cage. The next morning, Jake gave his boss 2 weeks' notice and cashed in his small savings account. He bought supplies, loaded his truck, and started driving toward the mountains. If Elena Vasquez wouldn't teach him, he'd find someone who would. If there was no one willing to teach him, he'd figure it out on his own. Because somewhere between Catherine's laughter and Marcus Colton's warning, Jake Morrison had realized something important. This wasn't just about proving himself worthy of Catherine Hartwell anymore. This was about proving he was worthy of himself. The mountain road was narrow and winding, with drop-offs that made Jake's palms sweat as he navigated the curves. He'd been driving for 3 hours when he finally saw the hand-painted sign, "Vasquez Ranch, private property, no trespassing." Below it, in smaller letters, "Violators will be shot." Welcoming committee, Jake thought grimly. He turned down the dirt road anyway. The ranch buildings appeared gradually through the pines. A small house with a wraparound porch, a barn that had seen better days, several paddocks with weathered fencing, and everywhere, horses. More horses than Jake had ever seen in one place, moving like liquid shadows through the afternoon light. He parked his truck and climbed out slowly, hands visible. A woman emerged from the barn, and Jake's first thought was that she looked nothing like what he'd expected. Elena Vasquez was small and slight, probably in her 70s, with steel gray hair braided down her back and eyes that seemed to look right through him. "You're on private property, young man." "Yes, ma'am. I'm Jake Morrison. I was hoping to speak with you about—" "I know who you are." Elena wiped her hands on a rag and studied him like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "News travels fast in small counties. Catherine Hartwell's challenge, Marcus Colton's devil bull. You've got yourself quite a mess, don't you?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you think I can help you?" Jake took a deep breath. "I think you're the only one who can help me. I've heard stories about what you can do with animals, horses that were written off as killer cattle that wouldn't be handled. You've got a gift. Elena's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. Gift, that's what people call it when they don't understand the work involved. 20 years of broken bones, torn muscles, and sleepless nights, that's my gift. Then teach me to earn it. Something in his voice must have caught her attention because Elena stepped closer, studying his face in the fading light. Why? Why risk your life for a woman who humiliated you in front of half the county? Jake had been asking himself the same question for days. Because she's worth fighting for. Because that bull deserves better than the life he's had. And because I need to know if I'm the kind of man who runs when things get difficult. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Around them, horses nickered softly as they settled in for the evening. The air smelled like pine needles and hay, and something Jake couldn't identify but found comforting. I haven't taken a student in 15 years, Elena said finally, and never for something like this. That bull isn't just mean, Jake. He's broken. Healing something that broken, it changes you, sometimes in ways you can't predict. I understand. No, you don't. Elena turned toward the house. But maybe that's for the best. Come on, we'll start tomorrow at dawn. And Jake? Yes, ma'am? If you're not serious about this, if you're just here because some pretty girl hurt your feelings, you'd better leave now. Because what I'm going to put you through will make Catherine Hartwell's laughter seem like a lullaby. Jake followed her toward the house, his heart hammering with equal parts terror and hope. Behind them, the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied like it was calling him home. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that at that exact moment, Catherine Hartwell was standing at her own kitchen window, staring out at the dark pastures and wondering what kind of monster she'd become. Dawn came too early and too cold. Jake woke to the sound of Elena banging on his truck window with a metal bucket. He'd slept in the cab, too proud to ask for a bed and too broke to drive back to town for a motel. Training starts now, Elena called through the glass. Move your lazy bones. Jake stumbled out of the truck, his back screaming from the cramped sleeping position. Elena was already walking toward the barn, moving with the kind of purposeful stride that meant business. He hurried to catch up, his breath-forming clouds in the mountain air. First lesson, Elena said without preamble. Forget everything you think you know about breaking horses or bulls. You don't break an animal. You break yourself open until there's room for understanding. She led him to a round pen where a sorrel mare paced nervously along the fence line. The horse was beautiful, but clearly troubled, her eyes rolling white with fear every time a human approached. This is Sunset. She came to me 6 months ago. Previous owner used spurs and whips, thought fear was the same as respect. Your job is to get a halter on her, without rope, without force, without making her more afraid than she already is. Jake studied the mare. She was smaller than Black Devil, obviously, but the fear in her eyes was the same. That deep, bone-level terror that came from betrayal by the very creatures who were supposed to provide care. How long do I have? As long as it takes, but Jake, Elena's voice carried a warning. If you lose your temper, if you try to rush or force her, you'll pack up and leave. This isn't about your timeline. It's about hers. The first hour was a disaster. Jake approached too quickly, moved too confidently, made all the mistakes that came from thinking with his human brain instead of understanding the animal's perspective. Sunset bolted to the far side of the pen every time he took a step forward. Eleanor watched from outside the fence, saying nothing, her weathered hands gripping the rail. Around them, other horses grazed peacefully, but Jake felt like he was performing for the harshest audience in the world. By noon, he was sweating despite the cool air. His shirt stuck to his back, and his pride was somewhere around his boots. Sunset hadn't let him within 10 feet of her. Lunch, Elena called, and thinking time. They sat on her porch, eating sandwiches and drinking coffee that could have stripped paint. Eleanor was quiet, but Jake could feel her evaluation like weight against his shoulders. I'm doing something wrong, he said finally. Yes. What? Elena smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. Wrong question, try again. Jake thought about it. Sunset's behavior, her fear responses, the way she moved. What is she trying to tell me? Better, What do you think? She's not just afraid of being hurt. She's afraid of being trapped. Every time I move toward her, she feels cornered. And Jake closed his eyes, remembering the mare's movements. She keeps looking at the gate. She wants to know she can escape if she needs to. Good. What else? I've been thinking about what I need from her instead of what she needs from me. Elena nodded. Fear makes creatures selfish, humans included. When you're afraid of failing, afraid of looking foolish, afraid of Catherine. Hartwell's laughter. You stop seeing anything except your own desperation. The words hit home. Jake had been so focused on proving himself that he'd forgotten the most basic rule of animal training. It wasn't about him. The afternoon session went differently. Instead of approaching sunset directly, Jake sat down in the center of the pen and waited, and waited, and waited some more. His back ached. His legs cramped. Doubt crept in like cold water, reminding him of Marcus Colton's warnings and Catherine's laughter, and the fact that he had less than 6 months to accomplish the impossible. But he stayed still. After 2 hours, Sunset's curiosity finally overcame her fear. She approached in tiny increments, ready to bolt at the first wrong move. Jake kept his eyes down, his posture relaxed, letting her set the pace. When she finally touched his shoulder with her soft muzzle, Jake's heart nearly exploded with triumph. But he didn't move, didn't celebrate, didn't do anything except breathe slowly and let her explore. By evening, Sunset was accepting gentle touches. Not the halter yet, but progress. Real, honest progress built on trust instead of force. Better, Elena said when Jake finally emerged from the pen. Much better. But this was the easy part. Easy? Sunset was broken by stupidity and impatience. She remembers what it was like before the fear. Black devil, Elena shook her head. That bull was broken by deliberate cruelty. He doesn't remember safety. As far as he knows, humans are just predators who walk on 2 legs. That night, Elena let Jake sleep in the spare room. It was small and simple, with a narrow bed and walls covered in photographs of horses. Some were obviously champions with ribbons and trophies. Others looked like rescue cases, thin and scarred but with gentle eyes. My life's work, Elena said when she caught him studying the pictures. 40 years of trying to undo what humans did wrong. Any regrets? Elena was quiet for so long that Jake thought she wouldn't answer. I had a daughter once, Sarah. She wanted me to retire, move to town, be a normal grandmother who baked cookies and knitted sweaters. What happened? She died in a car accident 10 years ago, never had children of her own. I kept telling myself I'd retire next year, spend more time with family. Next year turned into never. Elena touched one of the photographs, a picture of a young woman with Elena's eyes and a brilliant smile. Now all I have left are the horses, and the knowledge that somebody needs to keep doing this work. Jake understood. The horses weren't just Elena's profession. They were her penance, her purpose, her way of making sense of a world that could be beautiful and cruel in the same breath. Is that why you agreed to help me? Because you don't want to see another creature suffer? Partly. Elena turned away from the photographs, but also because I saw something in your eyes yesterday, the same thing I used to see in Sarah's when she was little and found a baby bird with a broken wing. You can't walk away from suffering, even when it's not your fault, even when trying to fix it might break you. The words followed Jake into sleep, mixing with dreams of Catherine's laughter and Black Devil's rage and Sunset's tentative trust. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in the Hartwell mansion, Catherine was having the worst 3 weeks of her life. It had started the morning after the festival, when her housekeeper Maria found her crying into her coffee at the kitchen table. Mia, what's wrong? Maria had worked for the Hartwell family for 30 years, since Catherine was a little girl. She was the only person who could get away with treating Catherine like anything other than the county queen. I'm a horrible person, Maria. Probably. What did you do this time? Despite her tears, Catherine almost smiled. Maria never sugarcoated anything. I humiliated Jake Morrison in front of half the county, made him look like a fool for having feelings. And now you feel guilty. I feel like a monster, Catherine wiped her eyes with a dish towel. You should have seen his face. He was trying so hard to be brave, and I destroyed him. Maria poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from Catherine. Why? Why what? Why did you do it? Jake Morrison is a good man, works hard, treats animals well, never causes trouble. Why hurt him? Catherine stared into her coffee cup like it might hold answers. Because I was scared. Of what? Of what, people would think. Of what Daddy would have said. Of the fact that maybe, just maybe, I actually wanted to say yes. Maria's eyebrows rose. You have feelings for this boy? I don't know. Maybe he's different. When he works with the horses, it's like he speaks their language, and he looks at me like I'm not just a bank account with legs. Unlike Richard Manning. Catherine grimaced. Richard was the businessman who'd been courting her for 6 months, bringing expensive gifts and talking about maximizing the ranch's potential. He was handsome, successful, and perfect on paper. He was also about as exciting as watching paint dry. Richard is safe, appropriate, the kind of man I'm supposed to marry. And Jake Morrison is not. Jake Morrison lives in a trailer and earns minimum wage. I can't marry someone like that. What would people think? Maria stood up and refilled her coffee cup, but her movements were sharp with disapproval. You want to know what I think? I think your father filled your head with so much nonsense about family reputation and social standing that you forgot how to listen to your own heart. Daddy built this ranch from nothing. He sacrificed everything to give me a good life. And what has that good life gotten you? You're 32 years old, Mika. You're beautiful, intelligent, and wealthy. You could have any man you want. But you spend your evenings alone, reading business reports and worrying about what dead people would think of your choices. The words stung because they were true. Catherine's father had died 5 years ago, leaving her the ranch and a burden of expectations that felt heavier than the Montana mountains. She'd been so busy being the perfect rancher's daughter that she'd forgotten how to be herself. It doesn't matter now anyway. Jake will never forgive me for what I did. Probably not. But that doesn't mean you can't try to make it right. Catherine looked up sharply. What do you mean? Maria's smile was mysterious. Nothing, Mija. Nothing at all. But over the next few days, Catherine noticed strange things happening around the ranch. Feed deliveries that she hadn't ordered, veterinary bills that were mysteriously paid in advance, equipment repairs that were completed without her authorization. When she confronted Maria about it, the older woman just shrugged. Maybe you forgot. You've been distracted lately. Catherine knew she hadn't forgotten. Someone was paying for things anonymously, and she had a growing suspicion about who it might be. The thought made her stomach twist with guilt, and something else she didn't want to examine too closely. 2 weeks after the festival, Richard Manning proposed. He did it properly, of course. Expensive dinner at the country club, imported champagne, a ring that probably cost more than most people made in a year. The diamond caught the light like captured starfire, beautiful and cold and perfect. You don't have to answer tonight, Richard said when Catherine just stared at the ring. Take your time, think about it. We'd be good together, Catherine. A power couple. We could expand the ranch operations, maybe develop some of the unused acreage. Catherine nodded and accepted. The ring, but her heart felt like lead in her chest. That night, she stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the pastures where her cattle grazed under the stars, and wondered when her life had become a business transaction. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Jake Morrison is up at Elena Vasquez's place, Maria announced over breakfast, her tone carefully neutral. Catherine's coffee cup rattled against the saucer. What? My cousin works at the feed store in town. Says Jake bought enough supplies for a long stay. Drove up into the mountains 3 days ago. Elena Vasquez hasn't taken a student in years. Apparently, she's made an exception. Catherine felt something cold and sharp twist in her stomach. He's really going to try it. He's really going to train that bull. Surprised? I thought he'd give up. Come to his senses, realize it was impossible. Maria's look was knowing. You hoped he would, because if he gives up, you don't have to face the possibility that he might succeed. It's not about that, isn't it? Catherine stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need to check on the north pasture. She spent the day riding fence lines, ostensibly looking for breaks or damage, but really just trying to outrun her own thoughts. But everywhere she looked, she saw reminders of Jake. The gate he'd repaired last spring when she was too proud to ask for help. The sick calf he'd nursed back to health using his own time and supplies. The way her horses always calmed when he was around, like they recognized something in him that she'd been too blind to see. By evening, she was exhausted and no closer to peace than when she'd started. She unsaddled her horse and was heading toward the house when she saw a familiar truck parked in her driveway. Marcus Colton stood on her front porch, hat in hand and expression grim. Evening, Catherine. We need to talk. She invited him in, offered coffee, made small talk about weather and cattle prices. But Marcus's tension was obvious, and finally she couldn't stand it anymore. What's on your mind, Marcus? Jake Morrison. And what? You've got him trying to do. Catherine's defenses went up immediately. That was his choice. I offered him a challenge and he accepted it. A challenge? Marcus's voice was sharp. Catherine, that bull has put 4 men in the hospital. 1 of them will never walk again. What you offered Jake wasn't a challenge. It was a death sentence with a pretty bow on top. Jake is a grown man. He can make his own decisions. Can he? Because from where I sit, it looks like a lovesick boy, trying to prove himself to a woman who thinks his life is worth less than her wounded pride. The words hit like physical blows. Catherine felt her face burn with shame and anger. How dare you? How dare I tell the truth? That bull isn't just mean, Catherine. He's been tortured. Somebody worked him over real good before I found him. Electric prods, chains, beatings that would make a grown man sick to think about. And now you want Jake to climb into a pen with that much rage and trauma? Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. I didn't know. Well, now you do. Question is, what are you going to do about it? After Marcus left, Catherine sat alone, in her father's study, surrounded by portraits of previous generations of Hartwells, strong men and women who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd never backed down from a challenge or shown weakness in the face of adversity. But looking at their stern faces now, Catherine wondered if strength and cruelty had gotten confused somewhere along the way. If the same pride that had built the ranch had also built walls around her heart. She pulled out her phone and dialed Jake's number, but it went straight to voicemail. He was probably up in the mountains with no cell service, learning whatever Elena Vasquez had to teach him, learning how to risk his life for a woman who didn't deserve it. That night, Catherine dreamed of a young man with gentle hands and patient eyes standing in a pen with a creature made of rage and pain. In the dream, she tried to call out a warning, tried to tell him to run, but no sound would come from her throat. She woke up screaming his name. 4 months had passed since Jake first climbed Elena's mountain, and his hands told the story of every single day. Scars from rope burns, calluses thick as leather, fingers that had been stepped on, bitten and scraped raw. But it was his eyes that showed the real change. They held a depth that hadn't been there before, a patience born from countless hours of silent communication with creatures who spoke in body language and trust. Today's the day, Elena announced over breakfast, her voice carrying none of the gravity that Jake felt pressing down on his shoulders like a landslide. You think, I'm ready? Elena studied him over her coffee cup. 4 months of mountain training had changed Jake from an eager ranch hand into something else entirely. His movements were quieter now, more deliberate. He'd learned to read the space between a horse's ears, to feel the shift in an animal's breathing that meant fear or acceptance or rage. I think Black Devil will tell us if you're ready. Animals don't lie, Jake, they can't. If you've learned what I've tried to teach you, he'll know. If you haven't, she shrugged. Well, Marcus Colton keeps good insurance on his stock. The joke fell flat. They both knew what was at stake. Jake, had called Catherine exactly once during his training, 3 weeks ago. She'd answered on the first ring, her voice breathless like she'd been running. "Jake, I wanted you to know I'm still working on it. The challenge." A long pause. "Jake, about that night, I need to tell you something. Save it for after." His voice came out harder than he'd intended. "If I succeed, we'll talk. If I don't, it won't matter anyway." He'd hung up before she could respond, but the conversation haunted him through the remaining weeks of training. There had been something in her voice, something that sounded almost like regret. Now, as he loaded his gear into the truck for the drive down the mountain, Jake tried to push thoughts of Catherine aside. Black Devil demanded his full attention. Anything less than complete focus could get him killed. The drive to Marcus Colton's ranch felt both endless and too short. Jake's hands were steady on the wheel, but his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. Helena rode beside him in comfortable silence, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing fragments of wisdom that sounded more like poetry than training advice. "Remember," she said as they turned into Marcus's driveway, "you're not fighting him. You're not conquering him. You're showing him that not all humans are monsters." A crowd had already gathered. Word traveled fast in ranching communities, and Catherine's challenge had become the stuff of local legend. Jake recognized faces. From the Harvest Festival, neighbors who'd known him since he was a kid mucking stalls for pocket change. Some looked excited, others worried. A few seemed to be waiting for the entertainment of watching him fail spectacularly. Marcus met them at the truck, his expression grim. "Jake, Eleanor, hell of a thing you're attempting here." "Where is he?" Jake asked. Marcus jerked his head toward the large pen behind the barn. "Been pacing all morning, almost like he knows something's coming." Jake walked toward the pen slowly, Elena beside him. The crowd followed at a respectful distance, their conversations dropping to whispers as they approached the fence. Black Devil was everything Jake remembered and worse. 4 months of training hadn't diminished the bull's presence. If anything, he seemed larger, more dangerous, a living storm contained by steel rails and human foolishness. His black hide rippled with muscle as he moved, and his eyes held the kind of rage that came from deep, unhealed wounds. "Jesus," someone whispered behind Jake. "Look at the size of that thing." Jake heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Catherine walking toward them. She looked different somehow, smaller. The confidence that had always surrounded her like armor seemed cracked, uncertain. She wore simple jeans and a work shirt instead of her usual perfect outfits, and her face was pale with worry. "Jake." Her voice was soft, almost lost in the afternoon wind. "Catherine." He didn't trust himself to say more. She stepped up to the fence beside him, her presence both comforting and distracting. "You don't have to do this. The challenge, the bet, whatever you want to call it. I was wrong to..." "Yes, I do." Jake's voice was steady. "Not for you. Not anymore for him." He nodded toward Black Devil. "That bull has been hurt enough. If I can help him trust again even a little, then maybe some good comes out of all this." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "And if you can't?" Jake smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Then you get what you wanted 4 months ago. I leave Millbrook County, and you never have to see me again." Before Catherine could respond, Eleanor stepped between them. "Enough talk. Jake, if you're doing this, it's time." The crowd pressed closer to the fence as Jake stripped off his jacket and pulled on the worn leather gloves that Elena had given him. They were soft with age and use, molded to fit hands that knew how to communicate without words. Marcus opened the gate to the pen, and Jake stepped inside. Black Devil's reaction was immediate and violent. The bull charged, not with the calculated aggression of a rodeo animal, but with the desperate fury of a creature that had learned to strike first and ask questions never. Jake rolled aside, feeling the wind of the bull's passage ruffle his hair. The Awas crowd gasped, but Jake blocked out their noise. There was only him and Black Devil now, two beings trying to understand each other across the gulf of species and trauma. For the first hour, it was pure survival. Black Devil charged again and again, his massive body moving with surprising speed and agility. Jake dodged, rolled, and once had to vault the fence entirely when the bull cornered him against the rails. "This is insane," he heard someone shout. "Somebody stop this before he gets killed." But Jake climbed back into the pen, his eyes never leaving Black Devil's face. Because between the charges, between the rage and violence, he was starting to see something else. The bull's attacks weren't random. They followed patterns, predictable responses to movements that Black Devil perceived as threats. Jake changed his approach. Instead of dodging away from the bull's charges, he began moving parallel to them, showing his profile instead of facing. Black Devil head-on. Predators faced their prey. Herd animals moved alongside each other. The change was subtle but noticeable. Black Devil's charges became less frequent, less desperate. He was still angry, still dangerous, but the blind panic was fading. By the second hour, Jake was able to stand still in the center of the pen without immediately triggering an attack. Black Devil paced the perimeter, snorting and pawing the ground, but keeping his distance. "Talk to him," Elena called from outside the fence. "Let him hear your voice." Jake started speaking, his voice low and steady. He talked about the weather, about the mountains, about anything except the bull's obvious distress. Just sound, human sound that wasn't shouting or threatening. Black Devil's ears twitched. He slowed his pacing, head cocked slightly as if trying to make sense of this strange human who didn't attack or run or try to dominate. The third hour was when everything changed. Jake had been standing motionless for 20 minutes speaking softly about Elena's horses when Black Devil finally approached, not charging this time but walking with the careful steps of an animal testing dangerous ground. The bull stopped just outside arm's reach, his massive head lowered and his eyes fixed on Jake's face. This close, Jake could see the scars, rope burns around the neck, marks from electric prods along the flanks, evidence of systematic cruelty that made Jake's stomach churn with rage. "I know," Jake whispered. "I know they hurt you, but not all of us are like that. Some of us want to help." Black Devil snorted, his breath hot and humid. Jake could smell the rank scent of an animal that had lived too long in fear and isolation. Slowly, carefully, Jake extended his hand. The bull's reaction was swift, but not violent. He jerked his head back, eyes rolling white with terror. But he didn't charge. He didn't attack. He just stood there, trembling with the effort of fighting every instinct that screamed at him to destroy this threat before it could hurt him. "It's okay," Jake said. "I'm not going to hurt you. Nobody's ever going to hurt you again if I can help it." Time stretched like taffy. Jake kept his hand extended, not moving forward, but not withdrawing either. Just offering, waiting, letting Black Devil make the choice. The crowd outside the fence had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then, with the careful deliberation of a creature making the hardest decision of its life, Black Devil stretched his neck forward and touched Jake's palm with his muzzle. The contact lasted only a second before the bull jerked back, but it was enough. Jake felt tears streaming down his face as he realized what had just happened. For the first time in years, Black Devil had chosen to trust instead of fight. The rest happened gradually. Jake spent another hour in the pen, slowly building on that moment of contact. He touched the bull's neck, his shoulder, ran his hands along the scarred hide with the gentle persistence that Elena had taught him. Black Devil flinched and trembled, but he didn't bolt. He stood there and endured human touch, perhaps for the first time since his rescue. When Jake finally led Black Devil to the gate using nothing but his voice and a gentle hand on the bull's neck, the crowd erupted in cheers. But Jake barely heard them. He was focused on the massive animal beside him, on the trust that had been offered like a fragile gift. Marcus Colton looked like he'd seen a ghost. "I don't believe it. 20 minutes ago, that bull would have killed anyone who got within 10 feet. "He's not healed," Jake said quietly, his hand still resting on Black Devil's neck. "He might never be completely healed. But he's remembered that not all humans are monsters." Jake turned to face the crowd, his eyes finding Catherine immediately. She stood at the fence with tears streaming down her face, her knuckles white where she gripped the rails. I did what you asked, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. I tamed your devil, but I'm not here to collect on the bet. Catherine's face went white. What do you mean? I mean, I don't want to marry someone who could humiliate a man for having feelings. I don't want to marry someone who thinks love is something you win through parlor tricks and dangerous stunts. Jake's voice was steady, but Catherine could hear the hurt underneath. I wanted to marry Catherine Hartwell, but that woman doesn't exist, does she? She's just a role you play. The words hit Catherine like physical blows. She climbed over the fence and approached Jake, oblivious to Black Devil standing just feet away. You're right, she said, her voice breaking. You're absolutely right. I am cruel and spoiled and so terrified of what people think that I forgot how to be human. But Jake, please let you what? Apologize, explain, promise to do better. Jake shook his head. 4 months ago, you made me look like a fool in front of half the county. Today I proved I could do the impossible. But it doesn't matter, does it? Because the only thing I really wanted was for you to see me as someone worth loving. And if you couldn't see that before, a tamed bull isn't going to change anything. Catherine felt her heart breaking as Jake turned away from her. She'd rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times, imagined all the ways she could make things right. But she'd never anticipated this. Jake succeeding, but walking away anyway. Jake proving himself and then proving that her opinion no longer mattered to him. Wait. The voice came from Elena, who had been watching the entire exchange with the quiet attention of someone who understood the deeper currents at play. Jake, there's something you should know. Jake paused, his hand still on Black Devil's neck. The feed bills, the veterinary costs, the equipment repairs over the past 4 months. Elena's voice carried clearly to the entire crowd. Catherine paid for all of it, anonymously. She's been supporting your training from the beginning. Jake turned back to Catherine, his expression unreadable. Is that true? Catherine nodded, unable to speak. Why? Because I was ashamed. The words came out in a rush. Because I knew what I'd done was wrong and I couldn't figure out how to fix it. Because I was terrified you'd get yourself killed trying to prove something I never should have asked you to prove. You could have just called off the bet. You wouldn't have let me. You're too stubborn, too proud, just like me. Catherine wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. So I did the only thing I could think of. I tried to help without you knowing it was help. Jake stared at her for a long moment. Behind him, Black Devil snorted softly, as if commenting on the drama unfolding in his pen. Jake, Catherine said quietly, I need you to know something. I've been wrong about everything. About what matters, about what I want, about who I want to be, and I've been especially wrong about you. What do you mean? Catherine took a deep breath. I mean, I've been in love with you since the day you spent your own money to buy medicine for that sick calf last spring. I've been in love with you since you fixed my fence without being asked, since you talked my prize mare through her difficult labor like she was a frightened child who needed comfort. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I've been in love with you since long before that night at the Harvest Festival, but I was too much of a coward to admit it. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. I don't want your pity, Jake said finally. Good, because this isn't pity. This is me, standing in a pen with a bull that could kill us both, telling you that I love you, not because you tamed Black Devil, not because you proved anything to anyone, but because you're the kind of man who sees a broken animal and thinks about healing instead of conquest. Jake looked at Catherine, really looked at her, and saw something he'd never noticed before. Fear. Not of the bull, not of physical danger, but of the same thing that had terrified him 4 months ago. The fear of reaching for something beautiful and having it disappear. If I said yes, Jake said slowly, if I said I still loved you despite everything, what would we be walking into? Your friends will never accept me. Your social circle will always see me as the hired hand who got lucky. Then we'll find new friends, better friends. Catherine's voice was steady now, sure. Jake, I've spent my whole life trying to live up to other people's expectations. My father's, the community's. Some imaginary standard of what a Hartwell should be. But you know what I figured out these past 4 months? What? None of those people love me. They love my name, my money, my ranch, but none of them see me the way you saw me that night at the festival, like I was someone worth fighting for. Jake felt the last of his defenses crumble. This was Catherine as he'd always imagined she could be. Honest, vulnerable, real. And Richard Manning, he asked. Richard Manning can take his ring and his business plans and find someone who wants to be a merger instead of a marriage. Jake smiled then, the first real smile Catherine had seen from him in months. In that case, Catherine Hartwell, I have a question for you. What? Would you like to go on a date? Nothing fancy. Maybe dinner at Murphy's Diner, a movie at the drive-in. The kind of normal, ordinary evening that two people who are figuring out how to love each other might enjoy. Catherine's answer was to step forward and kiss him, right there in Black Devil's pen, in front of half the county, with no thought for appearances or propriety or what anyone might think. The crowd cheered. Black Devil snorted his approval, and somewhere in the mountains, Elena Vasquez smiled and began planning for the wedding she was certain would follow. Because some kinds of love, the real kinds, were worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth taming devils for. And some kinds of love, once found, refused to be broken by anything the world could throw at them.